Welcome, everyone. We'll give everyone just a minute here to finish getting logged in, and then we will get started. This is our fourth masterclass, and we have Jason Juhl, Justin Fitzpatrick here to go over the tax smart distribution planning part 1. Our next masterclass is on June 11th. You can also see the last masterclass and register for both of those on our website. We do have a nice site also that has all the key takeaways and slides that we do send out via email to all of those that register. So please check your email for all of that wonderful material. As always, we have a Q&A section. So if you have a question, please pop your questions in there. We will try our best to get to as many of those as possible. We will address the ones that have the most likes on them. So if you could like the question that you would like heard, if one of your peers has put that in there. Last but not least, there is a survey at the end for your CFP-CE. And also we have an RICP certification that we can send out, a certificate rather. So at the end of this webinar, there will be a CE spot to put in your CE number. Feedback and suggestions. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session. We always hope that you stay on for the whole time, but you must attend at least 50 minutes to get CFP CE credit. So with that, I will pass it over to Justin and we'll get started.
All right. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you, Jason. Good to see everyone. Hope you all had a great long weekend. We're into the second half of the masterclass here. It's been really great so far. Gotten a lot of great feedback from everyone. So please do, if you missed any of the previous sessions, check out the website for this course. There's, recordings, materials, some extra, bonus videos and things there. So lots of good stuff. And of course, as we do more of these sessions, more will appear there. So let's get to today's class. So as I said, we've entered the second half of the course, and that means tax smart distribution planning. So we'll be doing 2 sessions on this topic. Today will be kind of high level about tax smart distribution planning. In 2 weeks, we'll hit more particulars and details. And then the final kind of wrap-up class will be case studies in income planning and management. So definitely, if you have, we'll be looking back through all of your questions and things and trying to make sure we craft some really good case studies to kind of tie all of these things together. So I'll just do a quick review of sessions 1 to 3 here before we knock this out, before we get into tax smart distribution planning. But just to remind everyone where we've been, we really kind of use those first 3 sessions to set up the need for adjustment-based planning, for talking to people in terms they understand, in terms of what can I spend, what would change that, what would the changes look like. Rather than probability of success. And we went over the kind of the process. So this slide, which is also available on the course website, is the process as viewed from the client perspective. So starting out with how much can I spend, then exploring options or doing what we call scenario planning or A/B testing, and then choosing a plan to follow, and then entering this phase of monitoring and adjusting as time goes by. From the advisor and team perspective, it looked like this, which was beginning with resources, beginning with what can I spend, then adding any crucial expense goals and legacy goals, doing scenario planning and finding this core plan. Next, creating a tax smart plan, which is what the next 2 sessions are going to be about. Which leads you to having a complete plan that you can present and implement. Okay, so getting to tax smart distribution planning. I want to begin really by asking, I know, Jason, this is kind of, I know you love adjustment-based planning, but tax planning, I just see like the joy in your eyes when we
Bite my
discuss this.
tongue, Justin. I'm ready. I'm ready to hold
So
myself back here.
let's just start with kind of what is tax smart distribution planning from your point of view, the kind of thing we're going to talk about, and how is it different from other kinds of tax planning?
For sure. I think this all ties in really well with just that decumulation phase. And, you think about it, a lot of advisors, they really focus on the accumulation phase, which is great and incredibly important. But decumulation is really a differentiator for us, which is why we've decided that we're going to work with clients 5 years pre-retirement through end of life, because that's who we feel we can really serve well. And instead of going a mile wide and an inch deep, we go an inch wide and a mile deep. And so from a differentiation standpoint, as we think about metaphors and analogies, Justin, do you mind sharing my iceberg slide?
Sure.
That doable? I threw a little curveball in here, but we like to talk in metaphors and talk in analogies. And a common analogy and metaphor that we'll use is the iceberg. So what do I mean by an iceberg? Well, with an iceberg, you can see what's above the water level. And ultimately, that's oftentimes where people will focus their attention. Clients will focus their attention, retirees and investors will focus their attention. But the reality is the majority of that iceberg, the majority of the mass of that iceberg is below the water level. So from a metaphorical standpoint, oftentimes retirees are very focused on the investments, and that's what they can see above the water level. But what we've found is the true value and differentiator between us and the other advisors we compete against is what's below the water level. And that's where we're managing taxes, right? So that's tax planning in a short-term format. That's a year-by-year basis. But then tax distribution planning is longer-term in nature, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now. And ultimately, how do we coordinate our clients' financial variables into one coordinated effort? And that really is distribution planning. And so, as we think through the distribution strategies, there's the conventional strategy, there's the pro rata strategy, there's dynamic, and then there's dynamic time sensitive. And the beauty of your software, Justin, Income Lab, is that it actually shows us the impact financially, specifically from a tax standpoint, which one of these strategies is optimal for our clients. And so it's really all about answering that simple question. And that is, given that you're going to follow a retirement plan, and that plan involves portfolio withdrawals, how should you source those withdrawals, and should you consider a Roth conversion? And that's the long-term strategic nature of tax smart distribution planning, and really looking at that bigger picture stuff when it comes to those distributions, what accounts to withdraw from, in what order, and how large should the withdrawal be.
And I notice on this graph, you also have, and you mentioned it even, I think you call it short-term planning, or you have tax loss harvesting here. I think it might be helpful just to distinguish between what you just mentioned, which is you're going to be taking withdrawals. How should you take them this year and then over the next, decades? Should you do Roth conversions, so on, sequencing of withdrawals and so on, and other kinds of tax planning that advisors may be doing and that can be valuable?
Yeah, when it comes to really relaying how we help our clients, it is more about trying to quantify the longer term benefit of executing a Roth conversion, or what distribution strategy is most appropriate. So we really want to look in a more longer term lens, and that's more strategic in nature, whereas the year by year is more tactical in nature. And quite frankly, our clients are a little less concerned and really not that interested in the tactical nature. They're more interested in, okay, can you quantify how a Roth conversion would impact my situation? Is it advantageous or not? And if it is advantageous, can you quantify, approximately to what degree would it help me and my family? And we're going to get into that. So I don't want to jump too soon with some of those kind of sound bites, if you will, but
that definitely helps. So tax smart distribution planning, it's more about the long-term strategy and about quantifying, for the value over the long term. Let me pull back up our other piece here. All right. So, and I think underneath that comment of, quantifying the value over time is the concept that for a lot of clients, this can be a place where the quantified value of long-term tax smart distribution planning sometimes can be really large. And so I'd love to get into, from your point of view, kind of what the areas are, what are the sources of that value that you can provide for clients with this?
yes. Well, there's a term we use, and that is the tax torpedo, right? So how do we avoid the inevitable tax torpedo? I know that sounds kind of ominous, maybe James Bond-like, but the reality is there's a lot of torpedoes that can take place in the course of an individual's retirement. You've got RMDs kick in, let's say it's 73, 75, whatever the age is, maybe they're already taking it. But how do we help avoid those tax torpedoes? And does it make sense to start to move some money out of those traditional IRAs prior to RMD age, go ahead and pay some of those taxes today in the lower tax rate? Right now, we're underneath the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act here for the next 2 years. So we know that's in place. And what would be the benefit of that Roth conversion, whether that is just executing a Roth conversion here over the next couple of years, which you can do in Income Lab, be very targeted with the size of Roth conversion, the duration you're going to have those Roth conversions, or do we want to fillet that out over a longer period of time and maybe target a tax bracket? Or is it a combination of both, which is really what would be our preference? You've got the widower's penalty, which unfortunately, it just is what it is, and the idea that women typically outlive men. And if they get married and they're the same age from a mortality standpoint, oftentimes the female is going to outlive a male. And so if they're moving from a joint tax bracket to an individual tax bracket, that could be a significant torpedo. Specifically, there's an age gap between the spouses. And so really trying to manage that the best we can through this planning software, as well as, the beneficiary scenario around, the 10-year rule. And if we have an heir who is still in their working years, more than likely they're kind of in that 60 plus range. I think the average inheritor is 65. Don't quote me on that. But that's oftentimes a higher income earning year. And so if we pile more distributions on top of their income as a result of having to unwind those traditional IRAs to erode them over the next 10-year period, how's that going to influence your heirs tax situation? So you've got multiple components. Number one, you've got the component of taxes that the client could save individually or as their family. You've also got the benefit to them now where they have additional dollars that they could spend. So how do we help them understand the amount of money they will save in taxes and then reposition those dollars into pursuing their goals? Maybe the vacation that they didn't take, that second home that they haven't purchased, what have you. And then last but not least, what's going to be the impact to the beneficiary? And that's where through this process, we think about legacy. Legacy can mean the amount of money you pass on to your heirs, or it can mean, in my mind, it is the memories you're able to make while you are alive and while your heirs are alive, and the dividends that the trip you took together continue to repay you as you sit down at the dinner table and rehash those memories and share those stories, and the fondness of those stories grows and grows and grows. And sure, there may be less dollars to pass on to your heirs because you spent this money on a vacation up front, but the dividends from those memories are going to last beyond our lifetime. And so that's another way to look at a legacy as well.
I think that's really important. So you identify, these are sort of the three biggest tax torpedoes, and they're easy enough to talk about with clients. Say, this is why we're doing this. This is where some of the dollars and cents value comes from, right? Helping you manage required minimum distributions, helping you manage the, pretty much inevitable widower's penalty, helping you manage if your beneficiaries are higher income, all of that. But your point is, and that's great, and maybe people they intuitively understand that, but tying it back to what does that mean for you as a actual person living your life, trying to do the best you can, that actually ties us back to that very first session of the masterclass, which is, what's this all about? What's the point? It can look like this is an accounting exercise. It's not. It's about getting people's lives in a position where they can do the best they can.
Yeah, truly living their wealth. So the way I think of it is, when we're in tax lab, for example, and we're running these scenarios, if Roth conversion is appropriate or not, and the degree at which and magnitude at which it could save the client money, save their taxes. So that's all really important. But what is equally as important is understanding and helping the client understand the issue. If they continue to follow their current course of action, what is the cumulative amount of taxes they will pay over the course of their plan? And sure, there's some variables at play there, but in general, here's that total they will likely pay in taxes. And then to say, okay, well, what if we took a tax planning approach or a tax strategy and we looked at Roth conversions, and how would that impact your situation? And the reality is, more times than not, there's a tax savings as a result of pursuing those Roth conversions. And so comparing the two, no changes, continuing course, potentially dealing with that RMD tax torpedo, potentially dealing with the widower's penalty tax torpedo or the beneficiary tax torpedo. But what if we were to convert some money today, and how much would that save? But then taking it a layer further, and this is the most important part. The layer further is, okay, if we could save you through these Roth conversions approximately $300,000, how would you reappropriate that money? How would that change your family's life? What would you do differently today with those $300,000 that you aren't currently? And that's the key. And so I think oftentimes early on, when I first was introduced to Income Lab, which, by the way, my introduction to Income Lab was for this purpose. We looked at a bunch of software, decumulation software, specific to tax smart distribution strategies. This is why we were the most interested in Income Lab. And what I realized was clients really like Income Lab, but they like to see the guardrails first. And then the tax lab is really valuable when it comes to the savings, but you can't rely on just them saving money in order to close the business. Okay, this is very, very, very important. I used to think that I could show a Roth conversion, which would result in a saving of $200,000, $300,000, $500,000, and that would sell itself. That doesn't close the business. That you have to build a gap. It is very important to ask a couple key questions. And when I go into a meeting, I always ask, what is the most important thing we need to accomplish today? So that is critical to understand what's the most important thing we need to accomplish today. But then from there, what's the biggest reason you're looking into making a change? Or what's the reason you're looking into tax planning or tax distribution planning? And let them elaborate a little bit. And what tax strategies have you utilized in the past? Because we want to know if they've tried this before and what's their sentiment around this approach, and or what tax distribution planning are they considering, and then understand how they feel they will benefit. And then last but not least, why now? So you're building a bridge. This bridge is incredibly important when it comes to closing business. I've got money in motion right now, 14.5 million that I closed just about since our last session. So this works. but you have to build the gap. You can't just assume the solution. You have to build the problem before you can solve. So understand that that's a critical element.
And I see already a couple of great comments and questions here. Somebody did suggest adding to the tax torpedoes Social Security timing, which I think is it's definitely a reasonable thing to consider here as well, which that's going to be part of these calculations. And we're going to get to the calculations and tax lab and examples and things, but I do want to just dwell for a little while on, this higher level and get some examples. I mean, Jason, you just mentioned, over 14 million in new business coming to your team just in the last couple of weeks. Some of it sounds like, where tax smart distribution planning was crucial. I'd love to just, kind of maybe get a little bit more color there, some examples, anonymized, of course, on, what sorts of clients seem to be most interested in this kind of planning, most who benefit best from this kind of planning, and so on.
It's a great question. So I'll give you a couple examples. One of them was a prospect that I literally just met a few weeks ago. And I do host some kind of tax planning seminars and some of those types of things, webinars. And this was actually a prospect from that particular seminar. And they've been self-directed really over the years. They had an advisor like 20 years ago, and the client's in 73-ish, and was just more in a set it and forget it type scenario. And as we know, that can be advantageous in the accumulation years. But in decumulation, that's oftentimes a pitfall. And so they had some unexamined areas that needed addressed, which were ultimately the tax torpedo of those RMDs. Here they are at 73, they're already taking RMDs. So you might think, okay, well, gosh, they're a little late in life. Is this tax distribution planning still advantageous? And the answer is, in their case, absolutely. So it was about 6.3 million. And we ran through Income Lab. And we reviewed the advantages to Roth conversions and the benefits to not only them as individuals, but also the benefits to their family. And what I found, and we found, is that they felt it was really valuable to save on taxes. Number one, they were willing to pay their fair share, but they didn't see any need to tip the government. And that is by far the most common theme that we see. But then in turn, once they realized we're tipping the government, $600,000, how would we use that money to our benefit? So now we're talking about family vacations, where they're going to bring the family together with grandchildren, and they're talking about going to Italy. And it really opened up the conversation. And as we're all aware, oftentimes from a spousal situation, there may be one spouse who's really comfortable from a financial standpoint and typically maybe leads the meeting. And there may be another individual who's a little more quiet and a little more reserved. But what was helpful in this interaction was we were able to get the more quiet and more reserved individual engaged in the conversation. And through tax saving, now the husband, who was more, financially involved, he's able to loosen up his purse strings a little bit because he feels like they saved this money through tax planning, and therefore, what a great way to benefit the family and those memories that they want to create together that will last a lifetime, far beyond their life.
I think that example of the somebody already in their 70s still able to benefit from tax smart distribution planning is a really good one, because I even admit personally, I sometimes, if I see somebody already in their 70s or getting close to RMDs, I start to think to myself like, there's probably not as much value now. And to be fair, I've seen that where you run the analysis and it's just not going to really provide much. There's you're not going to squeeze much out of it. But what you're saying is really, it's a drum that I beat a lot, which is there are no rules of thumb. You need to actually do the analysis. and, you know, people's idiosyncrasies, what's particular to their situation could mean there's value here. So don't just pass it over if you find a 75-year-old or something. Go ahead and do the analysis. And probably conversely, if somebody's in their 60s, don't just assume that Roth conversions will definitely provide a lot of value. You know, run the analysis.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm with you. There is no such thing as a rule of thumb, specifically in this day and age. And the back of the napkin calculation, as popular as that used to be, it's very difficult to quantify Roth conversions on the back of a napkin or a spreadsheet. And so you need the appropriate software to be able to extrapolate out those details. And this is a real clear and concise way to do that. And so the way that I frame it is you got strategy 2 here where it says total taxes. They're at the bottom, 1.1 million in cumulative taxes. They continue to you know, live out their financial lives the way it's set forth currently. Well, if they were to execute Roth conversions and target that 24% bracket, we'll see here there's a substantial savings. And so the way I frame it is I say, well, it looks like you are overpaying taxes by about $499,000. And I'll stop there. So once again, it's not saving taxes. This is actually they're choosing to overpay. Because now we've got a strategy that we believe will be effective. And it is reframing the position very differently. Saving money doesn't always drive people for change. But if you're telling them that they're choosing to pay more than they need to based on current research and tax strategy, that reframes the situation very differently. And then from there, you're able to say, okay, so, you know, of that 499,000, gosh, what might you do differently over the next course of your financial plan? How would that change you and your family's life?
That tweak, it certainly rings true to me. I've definitely found myself in that situation where it's like, oh, I could save money. Yeah, but you know, it's effort and I got a lot going on and so on. But the overpaying, it's just a tweak in language, but you're right. That's a great way to view it. And just so that if people, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to bring it back to that last point and say, you know, I talked earlier, most folks are willing to pay their fair share, but they don't want to tip. I go back to, as it sits today, it does look like you're tipping the government $499,000. Is that by design? Or how did that come to be? And then you open up the conversation.
Right. Just for those who maybe haven't seen Tax Lab before, let me just give you a little bit of a feel for what you're looking at here and what Jason's kind of been referring to over the last little bit of the conversation. So this is just a plan. I actually think this is the one of the examples that you can just load into Income Lab if you wish. So this is just called the retired household. Very creative name, I know. And if we look at their situation, you know, they're 2.75 million. They can spend about, you know, 19,000 a month. They have guardrails. It's a, you know, reasonably complex situation. They've got a rental, they've got a pension, they have 2 Social Securities. The timing is different. They're still paying off some things, which is why you see these lumpy expenses. They're following the retirement smile. So it's a reasonable mix of some of the complexities that we've talked about in the first 3 sessions. And then what we've done, what Tax Lab does, is it takes this particular plan and it runs it through a bunch of ways, all of the most commonly looked at ways to source their withdrawals and do Roth conversions. And so, you know, one of them is pro rata, which is just take from your accounts in proportion to their size. It's probably the best stand-in for the like pay no attention to taxes. That's a good stand-in for that. Of course, you're still following RMD rules and 59.5 rules and all that kind of stuff, right? But on top of that, take proportionally. Then we have taxable, tax-deferred, tax-free, and all mixes of that ordering, which is, you could think of it as kind of a waterfall. So first, you know, take everything out of here, then take it out of the next bucket, then take it out of the next bucket. And then we have Roth conversions targeting federal tax brackets. And then a bunch of statistics here summarizing the estimated differences in following these approaches. And so what you see here is Roth conversions to the 24% bracket, which looks to be, quote unquote, optimal for this particular plan compared to sourcing those withdrawals first from taxable, then tax deferred, then tax free. In this case, this is very much an apples to apples comparison, because when you're doing Roth conversions targeting a bracket, it's actually funding all of the normal planned withdrawals first from taxable, then from tax deferred, then tax free. So this is really, with and without Roth conversions is what you're looking at here. And we can talk, there's a lot of, there's already some questions and things. We'll talk more about the particulars of these and other things you can add to the picture and so on. But that's what you're looking at in Tax Lab. So before we get into a little more of the details there, are there any particular challenges that come along with doing this kind of tax smart distribution planning, and ways that you've dealt with those, Jason?
Absolutely. The biggest challenge as a practitioner is helping clients understand that there's a textbook answer, and that is what's optimal for their financial situation. The size of Roth conversion, when to take Social Security, all those details and outcomes. There's also a psychological answer, and that's what the client is comfortable with. And the psychological answer oftentimes does not align with the textbook answer. So our job as practitioners, my job is to help convey the message to demonstrate and quantify the benefits of different size Roth conversions. Maybe it's optimal. For example, the client I just referenced, who we're in the process of onboarding now, we actually were the optimal option was to target 35% bracket. But that was uncomfortable, right? Which I get it. We need to have our clients be able to lay their head down at night and get what we call return on sleep, ROS. That's my number one job. And so we basically decided to shoot the gap. And we're going to fill up about the mid 32% bracket in order to avoid those IRMA premiums. Because we all know those IRMA hurdles, once you exceed IRMA bracket by 1 penny, now you're paying the higher level premium. You've got the exact same insurance that everyone else has. It's just based on your greater income. And now as a result, those Roth conversions being included in income, you pay more in Medicare premiums. So we did decide to midpoint 32% bracket. So that's one example. Another example that I haven't shared yet, which I think people will really find interesting, is, we work with a lot of senior leaders. We work with, I've got a number of CEOs, CFOs, and likes from Fortune 100 companies. And one of them in particular retired recently, and he worked for a Fortune 100, very astute, capable of doing some of this himself? Probably, although there's constant change in tax code and planning, and he just really wanted to live out his retirement. And he had already had an advisor, was actually with his firm that he worked for. And so he had an employee discount on that fee, and they were helping him through some Roth conversions. They were doing some limit orders on concentrated stock and some other elements. And basically in our conversation, it was, this is our core focus. We work with a small subset of clients. It's all about decumulation, and it's all about the tax efficiency. And how do you coordinate this effort and even involve his CPA in these conversations? Because the CPA, we want to get the CPA stamp of approval on some of these efforts as well. And so through that conversation, he was willing to pay more. And we didn't quite double his fee, but it was closer to that range than not. And it was all a result of quantifying the benefit of tax planning and how imperative this would be for him and his family and how beneficial. And coordinating Social Security, pensions, do we take the monthly benefit? Do we take a lump sum? How do we coordinate? Just all of these income elements together.
I think that that example is also a good one and worth dwelling on for just a second, which is all of this analysis is really, really complex, and all of it's interrelated. So as someone mentioned on the Q&A, taxability of Social Security and so on. And you can get, these numbers are they're very precise and so on, and almost certainly directionally correct. But as you mentioned, this is a one-time thing. We don't know what, tax brackets will be 10 years from now. We don't know exactly what the returns will be and so on. And so it's really important not to be kind of, lulled into thinking, well, okay, I ran the analysis, so I got the answer, quote unquote. And also there's a psychological component. So this example, actually with this example, hypothetical household is actually not a bad one. You can see how these brackets, 22, 24, 32, 35, they are all very, very similar in the kind of value they are estimated to provide. In particular, these top 3 brackets you can see are, nothing to write home about. We're talking about basis point differences in average tax rate. So we often hear exactly the kind of story that you just said, Jason, which is, yeah, maybe the tax numbers say do X, but you're going to do sort of a slight variation on that or a slightly different one in order to take into account other factors in the client's life, including their appetite for doing a large Roth conversion or other situations in their life. So I think the way I like to talk about it is there's science, which is what you're looking at here, and there's art, which is the acknowledging you're working with a human being and acknowledging that taxes are not the only thing in their life. There are other factors, including if you do large Roth conversions and you are grossing up withdrawals to pay for them, you'll actually have increased sequence of return risk, right? So there just really is no free lunch on Earth, right? So that's an important factor to consider. We've also had a bunch of people in the Q&A mentioning the challenge of break-evens on Roth conversions. So I wonder if we could just show that here briefly. And it actually gets back to one of your tax torpedoes was beneficiary taxes, which I think comes into play here. So the break even on a Roth conversion is really saying, hey, I'm kind of ripping off the Band-Aid here in terms of taxes. At what point will I be glad I did that? At what point will sort of the pain of tearing off the Band-Aid have worn off? And again, it's the predictions are hard, especially about the future. And so we don't know exactly what the taxes will be. If someone passed away, the break even could be sooner because of what I forget which torpedo it was, the second one, I think, and so on, right? So in this case, your break even is about 20 years from now. And that could be part of the consideration, right? Just thinking about is longevity in the family, is 20 years a totally reasonable time frame if the beneficiaries are not in a high tax bracket, whereas if they are in a high tax bracket, the beneficiaries break even may be much sooner. So I'd love it if you talk a little bit just about kind of those competing factors and how you as a team take those into account.
Yeah, the break even it comes up on occasion. And I go back to the idea of the federal deficit. And I go back to the idea of the current tax rate. And I go back to the idea that we're underneath the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that's going to sunset, in 2026. And so what we know is the tax code that's going to be in place for the next 2 years. And those tax rates are lower. The percentages are lower than they were in the past and than they will be as of 2026. And so with that in mind, I think it's really valuable to execute those Roth conversions, at least for the next 2 years. And we can fillet that out and show them the quantification. if they were to take that approach. But then also the idea that, you know, when we think about business, business is all about revenues minus expenses. Well, the government, ultimately their expenses is the federal deficit and their revenues is taxation. And right now taxes are lower than they've ever been. And so what direction do you think taxes will go in the future? I've had 2 people ever tell me, and I've done, oh gosh, I don't know. I've had maybe a couple thousand registrants to my webinars and things. And I've had 2 people that have said they thought taxes were going to go down. And so it kind of puts that to bed. Once you get them to confirm what direction do they think taxes are going? Are they going to go up in the future? Or are they going to go down? And then it relieves that contention around the break-even point. And it's not a matter of if it's going to be beneficial, it's when and how long it takes. And is it going to be your direct benefit as the end client, or is it going to be your beneficiaries?
Right. Yeah, those are really good points. So the way the analysis is done here, for this example that we're looking at, we're not putting a firm date of death for either spouse. Now you can do that in a plan, and I think we may have discussed that in other webinars of, especially in situations of, a terminal disease or just, maybe it's just something you're trying to stress test. Also, you mentioned beneficiaries could make the value come sooner. But the other thing is we're using today's tax law. In this case, we are sunsetting, and I believe we'll probably be able to see that here. Yep. So you can see, we're actually going from a 24 to a 28% bracket in 2026. You could turn that off and you could continue the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act throughout the plan to maybe you think that that's a likely thing that Congress will do. But the fact is we simply don't know, right? I mean, we don't, and we certainly don't know 10, 20 years from now. And as you said, if people are thinking, well, I think they'll go up, you're really kind of understating the value and overstating the break even in that situation. And that's just good to know, right? I mean, no one is going to, assume that you actually have a perfect crystal ball to say exactly what the numbers will be over time. You're doing the absolute best you can with the information in the plan, and this is just one more of those inputs into the discussion of what should we do. It sure looks like some kind of Roth conversion strategy would do well for you here. I mean, even to the 12% bracket provides a little bit of relief. 22 and 24 certainly gets you in better shape. So just another thing to consider. All right. I'd like to just, we have a ton of questions, so I do want to get to some of those. So let's see here. I think let's go ahead and just quickly go over the tax planning process with everyone, just so that they can kind of connect it to those other diagrams that we started with from the first 3 sessions. So the first step is kind of, you're starting at the core plan, right? So you've done this A/B testing, you've considered scenarios, you've added your, important expenses, you've gotten all the resources, all of that is already done. And now you're moving into tax smart distribution planning, and you're asking, okay, given that my plan has distributions in it, how should I phase them? How should I order them? And should I do Roth conversions? So all you do is you grab the plan, you go to the tax lab, and the analysis happens for you. By the way, for those of you who have been with Income Lab for a little while, Jason mentioned IRMA brackets. We are adding IRMA brackets to Tax Lab. We're adding some other cool features as well coming up this year, so stay tuned for that. But at that point, you then choose a distribution strategy from that list, taking into account all of those things that Jason just discussed. It's not just about the numbers. There can be competing things. The next question is, if we follow that approach, does this household have kind of enough spending capacity to fund those Roth conversions from the plan as it exists. So for this household, they have quite a bit of spending capacity, and we actually did a full expense plan, I believe, for these folks. So they're looking for, I think it was like a little under 13,000 in spending. Yep. Well, for this year, it's a little higher than that, but if we took out the mortgage payments and so on, which are independently funded in an income lab plan. So we're really looking at kind of as your core spending, apart from that, gonna fund these. They don't have huge expenses. And so sometimes what you'll see is there's a surplus. So if I go to LifeHub, for example, I'll see, okay, they can actually fund from their available income, they can fund their expenses and these Roth conversions without any extra work. Another place to see that is in this flow diagram. So even with those Roth conversions and the taxes associated with them, they still have a little extra spending money. And actually that is true throughout their plan. So this is one of those situations. It actually does come up a decent amount, as we talked about in past classes, that someone's capacity is actually a little bigger than their current spending. However, if it's not enough, and if doing Roth conversions is going to lead to really high taxes, which will reduce their net income too much, the net spending available if you're doing Roth conversions is not enough, we go down and we create a plan that targets a particular net of tax spending level. And so that's what you do. I think there were a few questions asking, hey, if I do Roth conversions, it doesn't look like it's changing anything. For example, my gross spending will be the same. Yeah, your gross is, but not your net. So that's the big change you would see. And if the net is still not enough, that's when you choose a spending level, set it. And so what I did here is I said, okay, well, let's spend this amount. If I go to the level that spends 12,000 net, now I will have my expenses exactly match my income, no surpluses, no shortfalls in any given year. And now tax lab will look different. It will have net income being identical, right? Because I told it to. That's not a discovery about the world. I told it, hey, run me a plan where I'm always spending this 12,000 and change. And now what you've done by keeping that constant, you've forced the analysis to give you all the value in the net legacy and the total taxes, right? So you're saying, hey, if I kind of kept if I kept net income constant, I've got, in this case, almost $600,000 in extra net legacy. Now, the fact is you probably actually would spend some of that, right? And maybe it's not all going to the heirs. The other thing I've noticed is there are people who are just particularly tax sensitive. And so this number can still be, even getting to the same place, but paying less in taxes could be a value to someone. So that addresses a few of the questions that we had, and it kind of gives you a feel for what the path is for doing this kind of planning. So it's analyze it, choose a distribution strategy that works, that provides value. Ask yourself, could we fund the taxes? If you can, you're done. If you can't, find a net of tax level to target. We talked about that last time. And then do the, choose a distribution strategy again. So just to give you a feel for that, you're going to look at these strategies. It happens here that still 24 is the best. You won't always see that. It may be one of the neighbors to that once you've chosen a target there. But it's not uncommon that you're still kind of in the same range and the same kind of net savings to the less overpayment, as Jason was talking about there. All right. So, Jason, I guess just to wrap up before we add a few more questions, what sorts of, maybe you could help us with just some ways that you talk with clients about this process and the fact that, this is not, I'm going to send you out with a a map and you find your own way. It's actually part of the process we've discussed before, of the ongoing monitoring and management.
It is, yeah. I mean, life is an evolution, right? And so you think about your life a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's very different today than it was at that point. And as we look forward, there will continue to be an evolution. And so financial planning is an evolution, because our goals, our dreams, our aspirations are going to continue to evolve. The tax code is going to continue to evolve. But by having this living, breathing plan, not a document that you put on the shelf, a living, breathing plan that clients can log into and that we can access regularly, we're able to be very strategic in our efforts. Whether that is Roth conversions, whether that's QCDs, there's a number of ways that we can benefit clients from a tax standpoint. But how do you coordinate this effort for the client in a really understandable and deliverable way that allows them to see the message we're trying to convey and be empowered to now use this education and utilize these tax strategies to their benefit and how it's going to impact them and their families. That's the key. That's the tie-in, right? It's all about how we can improve our clients' lives. And that's what gets me excited. The savings is great, but what's more exciting is when they email me the photos from Italy, from Europe, from Iceland. That's what gets me excited, because I know, and they oftentimes reference it, that through these efforts, this tax planning, this tax distribution strategy, that's what allowed them to take that trip and empowered them to take that trip and to be able to have the confidence to spend some of their hard-earned money today, because they understand that tomorrow is not guaranteed. And we've all lost friends and family too soon. And that's, to me, that's what planning is all about. Is we want to have confidence to know that the future is bright. We're taking the necessary steps today to secure our finances down the road, but let's be empowered to spend those dollars today and tomorrow without fear.
Perfect. Let's hit a couple questions here, and since we have 2 sessions on tax smart distribution planning, any that we don't get to, very likely we'll hit them in 2 weeks. So thank you for your patience on that. Someone was asking, basically, how are the taxes paid here? I think we addressed a little bit of that, but another place I want to draw people's attention to is LifeHub is actually really useful for looking at the actual flows when you're doing a Roth conversion plan. So for example, here we're seeing in the first year, all of those Roth conversions are going to be coming out of John's IRA. We're not doing Mary's yet. I believe maybe in this plan, she's still working for a few years. So you can see where all that's coming from. And we're paying the taxes in this case from the taxable account. If there were no taxable funds, it would be netting out that IRA withdrawal and not putting all of it into the Roth. Right. So it's sequencing how you do this in the most tax efficient way possible. And I know someone said, sometimes my clients can't pay all those from another account. That's exactly what would happen in that situation. So it would say, okay, I'll take, 214 from the IRA, but only a certain, maybe it'll be 180 will actually hit the Roth. Another place you can see, not at the account level, but more at a higher level, is go to the tax lab and go to Explore. And you'll see also someone was asking about, quantifying the number of years of conversions. This purple are Roth, those are Roth conversions. So you can see here it's 5 years of Roth conversions. You can see how it all stacks up and where everything is going. Let's see here. We did also have a few people asking about additional things that can make plans even more tax efficient. People have mentioned, deductible medical expenses, QCDs. There are some people who are a little bit concerned about converting all tax deferred dollars into Roths. All totally reasonable. concerns. We're going to cover some of that in 2 weeks, but I did want to at least draw attention for some people that in the advanced settings of any plan, there's a very robust taxes section, and it's not uncommon that, you know, adding a floor on your IRA and 401k balances can add a little bit of value. Basically now it's saying don't Roth convert everything, leave a little bit around. I want some RMDs because maybe those will hit kind of a lower tax bracket. So that is all very much doable. But again, we're gonna do a lot more of that next week. Let's see here. All right. How about, have you had any interesting discussions with client CPAs? Is that a challenge? Is that a valuable kind of interaction around this kind of planning, Jason?
Yeah, you know, there's always risk there, right? And by risk, I mean the CPA might contest your approach or recommendation. And, you know, the reality is it's probably a coin flip whether the CPA agrees with the size of Roth conversion that we're recommending. And I tell the clients that up front. CPAs are really focused on this year and maybe next year, maybe. And so our job is to look further into the future, whereas the CPA's job is to look more in current time and year. And so just setting the stage early is very helpful. And CPAs have been more than open to the conversation. And quite frankly, it's a way to actually garner a center of influence. Because once you've shown a CPA this software and these tools, they're interested in how it would influence their other clients. And so we've gotten introductions and referrals, we call them introductions, through that effort as well. We spent about the last 9 months, 12 months, actually interviewing about 24 CPAs as COIs. So there's some fruit there that can be harvested.
Yeah. Let's see here. We have just a ton of questions that I'm having a little bit of trouble getting through, but we only have 2 minutes. So rather than kind of trying to find one there, I will just ask everyone to submit in the final the thing you'll get as you log off. Anything you want to make sure that we have your submitted questions, so we'll get to those next time as well. But if there are things you want Jason to address in 2 weeks, we'll do our best to include those. And yeah, any final words on this topic, Jason?
Yes, I just want to go back to the value of an advisor and the value that we really bring to the table. The value is really important, but if our client or our prospect isn't open-minded and hasn't answered those setup questions prior to discussing a Roth conversion, the benefits of a Roth conversion, I've found that the likelihood of them following through with it is less likely. And so we really want to impact our clients to the best degree possible, and we understand and believe that Roth conversions are a valuable component, I would encourage you to work on your setup questions. You really have to build that gap, because if a client doesn't understand or a prospect doesn't understand that there isn't a problem, and when I say problem, I don't mean they just acknowledge that it's a problem. We need to actually continue to plant more and more seeds to get them to really talk about the pain of that issue before we can jump to a solution. As advisors, I think we jump to solve too soon. But in the prospecting process in particular, it's all about building the gap. You want them to know you have a solution, but you don't necessarily want to tell them what that solution is.
Right. Great way to end the session, and thank you everyone for joining. We will see you all for the continuation in 2 weeks. So have a great week, everybody.
Thank you.